That cold morning, no one expected an act of kindness to change everything. What started as another day on the road became a story the whole town tried to explain, and few had the courage to tell. Before we begin, subscribe and turn on the bell. Here, we show that behind the engines and the leather, there are still human hearts. The desert wind cut through the neon glow of the roadside diner like a whisper of regret, carrying the faint tang of cooling engines and rain-slicked asphalt. It was the kind of place that clung to the edges of forgotten highways, where truckers nursed black coffee and wanderers stared into the steam rising from their plates. Inside, the air hummed with the low murmur of fluorescent lights and the occasional clink of silverware against chipped porcelain. Outside, a line of motorcycles stood sentinel under the flickering sign, Harley shadows etched against the dawn, their chrome dulled by the chill. The Iron Hawks had rolled in just before first light, a loose brotherhood of riders who'd claimed this stretch of Route 66 as their temporary haven. They weren't the monsters the locals whispered about. They were men shaped by long miles and longer silences, their leather vests heavy with patches that spoke of roads less traveled. Jack Harlan, the unofficial anchor of the group, eased his bulk onto a stool at the counter, his calloused hands wrapping around a mug that still held the warmth of the pot. At 52, he carried the weight of too many winters in his lined face, eyes like weathered slate that had seen more sunsets than promises kept. He'd ridden with the Hawks for 15 years, ever since the divorce that left him hollow, chasing horizons that never quite filled the void. The others, Rico with his quick laugh masking old wounds, Lena the mechanic who fixed more than bikes, and Tommy, the youngest, still raw from the war, settled into booths, their voices a low rumble like distant thunder. They came for the pie, or so they said, but really it was the quiet, a place to breathe without the world's judgment pressing in. Behind the counter, Maria wiped down the surface with a rag that had seen better days, her movements precise but weary. She was the diner's heartbeat, a single mother in her late 30s, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that swung like a pendulum with each shift. Her daughter, Sophia, was the light she carried, 8 years old, with eyes wide as the open road and a laugh that could cut through engine roar. Sophia wasn't there that morning. School had let out early for the holidays, and Maria had dropped her at the community centre down the road, where volunteers dressed as elves handed out candy canes and dreams. But Maria's mind lingered on her girl, on the letter Sophia had clutched that morning, a simple wish list scribbled in crayon, topped with a plea for a bike of her own, not the pedal kind, but something to feel the wind in her hair, like the stories Maria told of her own wild youth. The door chimed, shattering the diner's fragile peace. In strode Victor Langford, the billionaire who'd bought half the town without ever setting foot in it before. He was a man built for boardrooms, not back roads, tailored coat over a crisp shirt, his polished shoes clicking against the linoleum like accusations. Langford owned the factories that choked the air miles away, the land that swallowed small farms. And now, rumour had it, he was eyeing the diner for a chain stop. He slid onto a stool 2 down from Jack, his cologne cutting through the scent of bacon grease like an unwelcome intruder. The Hawks glanced his way but said nothing. They knew his type, men who saw the world as a ledger, people as lines to be erased. Maria approached with her notepad, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Coffee, sir. Menus on the board." Langford barely looked up from his phone, his voice clipped and cold as the wind outside. "Black, and make it quick. I don't have time for small-town dawdling." He scanned the room then, his gaze landing on the corkboard by the register, where community flyers fluttered like fragile hopes. One caught his eye, a faded poster for the holiday toy drive, Sophia's drawing pinned at the bottom, a little girl on a motorcycle, Santa's sleigh trailing behind like exhaust. Langford snorted, a sound that echoed too loudly in the quiet space. He plucked the paper free, holding it up like evidence in a trial. "What's this? Some charity scam?" He waved it at Maria, who froze, her pen hovering mid-air. "A kid wants a bike? From Santa? In this economy?" His laugh was sharp, devoid of warmth, drawing stares from the booths. The hawks shifted subtly, chairs creaking under leather. Rico's fork paused halfway to his mouth, his jaw tightening just enough to notice. Maria's hand trembled as she reached for the paper. "It's my daughter's drawing, sir. She's just a child. The toy drive helps families like ours." Her voice was steady, but Jack caught the strain in her breath. The way her shoulders curved inward like she was bracing for a storm. Langford leaned back, smirking. "A janitor's kid dreaming of wheels? Adorable. But let's be real. Santa's not real." "Sweetheart, and neither is upward mobility for folks like you. Tell her to get a mop. That's the family business." He tossed the paper back onto the counter, where it landed crumpled beside a broken mug shard from last night's rush. The diner fell silent, save for the hum of the coffee maker and the distant patter of rain starting to speckle the windows. Maria's eyes glistened, but she turned away, busying herself with the pot, her back a wall against the humiliation. Jack's fingers tightened around his mug, the ceramic warm against the chill seeping into his bones. He'd seen cruelty before, on battlefields, in courtrooms, in the mirror some nights, but this was petty, a rich man's sport with a little girl's heart as the target. Tommy, across the room, met his gaze, a silent question in the young man's eyes. The code stirred in Jack's chest, that unspoken pact among the hawks: protect the vulnerable, no matter the cost. No one hurts those we watch over. But the morning was young, the road endless, and Jack held his breath, waiting for the moment to break. Outside, the engines ticked as they cooled, the desert wind howling promises of change. The air smelled of gasoline and regret, and in that suspended quiet, the first crack of something deeper began to form. The rain had picked up by the time Jack pushed through the diner's door, the screen rattling behind him like an afterthought. The parking lot stretched out under a slate-grey sky, puddles mirroring the neon open sign in fractured reds and blues. His boots splashed through the shallow water, leaving ripples that spread like unspoken words. The Iron Hawk's bikes huddled together under a makeshift overhang of tarp and chain link, their frames slick with moisture, engines long since silent, but still radiating a faint heat from the morning's ride. Jack paused there, wiping his hands on his jeans, the leather of his vest creaking softly against the damp. He could still hear Langford's laugh echoing in his mind, sharp as shattered glass, and Maria's quiet retreat behind the counter. It gnawed at him, that casual cruelty, the way it landed on her like a weight she couldn't shake. Rico was already at work in the garage, across the lot, a squat building tacked onto the diner's side. Its bay doors half open to let in the light. The air inside hung heavy with the scent of motor oil and rubber, mingled with the earthy bite of wet concrete. Tools clattered in Rico's hands as he bent over Tommy's bike, a '72 shovelhead that had been coughing like an old man on the last leg of the interstate. Rico was 45, with a salt and pepper beard that hid the scar running down his jaw from a bar fight he never talked about. He'd been a welder once, before the layoffs hit the steel mills, and now he fixed what he could on the road. Engines, mostly. But sometimes people too, with a steady word or a shared cigarette. "Pass me the wrench," he grunted without looking up, his voice low, threaded with the rhythm of someone who'd learned to work through anger. Jack handed it over, his fingers brushing Rico's calluses, rough as sandpaper. They didn't speak of the diner right away. That wasn't their way. Instead, Jack leaned against the workbench, watching the rain drum on the tin roof, a steady patter that filled the spaces between breaths. Tommy wandered in from the back, shaking water from his jacket like a dog, his face still boyish under the stubble, eyes shadowed from nights that sleep couldn't touch. At 28, he was the newest hawk, fresh from a tour in the sandbox that left him with a limp he hid on good days, and nightmares on bad. He joined them 6 months back, chasing the hum of the road to drown out the silence of empty apartments. "Storms rolling in heavy," Tommy said, nodding toward the horizon where clouds boiled like regrets. He wiped his hands on a rag, the cloth coming away black, and glanced at Jack. "You hear that suit in there? Talking like he owns the air we breathe." Rico straightened, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his arm, the motion pulling at the faded tattoo on his forearm. A hawk in flight. Wings spread against a stormy sky. "Heard enough. Maria's been holding this place together since her husband walked out 5 years ago. Cleans the school nights, waits tables days. That girl's all she's got." He didn't raise his voice, but there was a steel in it, forged from years of watching the world chew up the good ones. The garage felt smaller then, the walls closing in with the weight of what wasn't said. Outside, a truck rumbled past on the highway, its headlights cutting through the downpour like accusations, tires hissing on the wet asphalt. Jack's mind drifted to the community center down the road, a low brick building with peeling paint and a playground that doubled as a parking lot on Sundays. He'd stopped there once, months back, when Lena had dragged the group to help with a food drive. Lena was the quiet force among them, 39 and wiry, her hands stained with grease from years under hoods. She'd grown up in a trailer park much like this one, fixing cars for her drunk dad until he drank himself gone. Now she rode with the Hawks, her bike a custom chopper with flames that looked like they'd been painted from memory. That day at the center, she'd knelt to Sophia's level, listening as the girl chatted about wanting a bike to match her mum's stories of freedom on 2 wheels. "Wishes like that," Lena had said later, over beers at a roadside bar. "They're what keep the road worth riding." Jack had nodded, but inside it stirred something old, a memory of his own daughter, lost to the divorce. Her laughter fading like taillights in the rear view. The door to the diner swung open again, and Maria stepped out, her apron clutched in one hand, the other shielding her eyes from the rain. She crossed the lot quickly, boots splashing, and ducked into the garage, bringing with her the faint smell of coffee and fried onions. "You boys need anything?" she asked, her voice softer now. The strain from earlier etched in the lines around her mouth. She looked at Rico, then Jack, avoiding Tommy's gaze, as if the humiliation still clung to her like damp clothes. Rico set down the wrench, his hands pausing mid-motion. "We're good, Maria. But Sophia, how's she holding up with that wish list? Center still doing the toy thing?" It was a gentle probe, the kind that came from knowing her struggles without needing the details. Maria's shoulders eased a fraction, and she leaned against the doorframe, rain dripping from her hair onto the concrete. "She's excited. Drew that picture for the drive, you know? Thinks Santa's got a whole fleet of bikes up there." A small smile tugged at her lips, but it faltered, her eyes flicking toward the diner where Langford's car idled, engine purring like a predator. That man. He made it sound so small, like her dreams don't count. Jack felt the pull then, that moral thread tightening in his chest. He stepped closer, the garage light casting long shadows across his face. "Dreams count for more than money, Maria. Always have." His words hung there, simple but heavy, the rain outside intensifying as if to underscore them. Tommy shifted, his breath catching slightly, and Rico nodded, picking up a socket set with deliberate care. The brotherhood stirred in that moment, not with shouts or fists, but in the quiet solidarity of shared glances, the way they made space for her pain without demanding she explain it. As Maria turned to head back, the diner's lights flickered through the storm, casting wavering patterns on the garage floor. Jack watched her go, the weight of unspoken loyalty settling over him like the desert chill. The road stretched on, empty and waiting, but in this pocket of rain-soaked refuge, something was building, a choice perhaps between silence and the code that bound them. The engines might cool, but the fire inside never did. not when it came to protecting what mattered. The afternoon dragged under a sky that refused to clear, the rain tapering to a fine mist that hung in the air like unresolved tension. Jack lingered in the garage doorway, watching Maria disappear back into the diner, her silhouette blurred by the steam rising from the asphalt. The lot felt emptier now. The Hawks' bikes gleaming dully under the overcast light, water beading on their tanks like unshed tears. He could hear the low murmur of voices from inside. Rico and Tommy resuming their work on the shovelhead, the clink of metal on metal, a rhythmic counterpoint to the distant rumble of thunder rolling in from the west. Jack's breath came steady, but his chest tightened with the echo of Langford's words, that careless dismissal slicing deeper than any blade he'd known on the road. He stepped out into the mist, the gravel crunching softly under his boots, and made his way toward the community center, a quarter-mile down the highway. The walk was deliberate, each stride pulling him through the chill that seeped into his joints, the kind that reminded him of winters spent hunkered in foxholes, waiting for dawn that never brought peace. The center squatted at the edge of town, its faded brick facade scarred by years of neglect, a chain-link fence sagging around a playground where swings creaked empty in the breeze. Holiday lights dangled from the eaves, half-strung and flickering sporadically, casting erratic shadows on the sign that read Hope Haven Community Outreach. Inside, the air would smell of pine from a donated tree and the faint sweetness of donated cookies, a fragile warmth against the world's indifference. Pushing through the double doors, Jack was met by the hum of activity, volunteers in red aprons sorting toys on folding tables, children clustered around craft stations, their laughter a tentative melody cutting through the low chatter. Sophia was there, perched on a stool at the far end, her small hands clutching a crayon as she added stars to another drawing. At 8, she carried an innocence that bordered on defiance, her dark curls framing a face smudged with graphite, eyes bright despite the overcast day filtering through the windows. She looked up as Jack approached, her smile blooming like a rare desert flower. "Mr. Jack, you came to see the wishes." He nodded, easing onto a nearby chair, the plastic creaking under his weight. The room felt alive with small kindnesses. A teenage volunteer handing out hot cocoa, steam curling from paper cups. An elderly man in a flannel shirt reading stories to a circle of kids, his voice gravelly but gentle. These were the margins of society, the places where the Hawks often found themselves. Outcasts extending hands to other outcasts, no questions asked. Jack had brought tools here before, fixing the center's leaky roof during a summer storm. His hammer strikes a silent vow to mend what he could. "Yeah, kiddo, heard about your Santa list. That bike sounds like a good one." Sophia's face lit up, but then dimmed, her crayon pausing mid-stroke. She glanced around as if checking for eavesdroppers, then leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Mom says wishes are free, but that man at the diner—" He laughed. "Said Santa doesn't come for girls like me." Her lower lip trembled, not with tears, but with the effort to hold them back, her small fingers twisting the crayon until the paper wrapper tore. Jack felt it then, that moral suspense coiling in his gut, a choice between letting the world grind down her spark or fanning it back to life. He reached out, his hand hovering before resting lightly on her shoulder, the leather of his glove cool against her sweater. "Santa's got a funny way of showing up, Sophia, sometimes on a sleigh, sometimes on 2 wheels, but he always knows who's got heart." Across the room, Lena was helping with the toy drive, her grease-stained hands surprisingly deft as she wrapped a doll for a shy boy in the corner. She caught Jack's eye, nodding subtly, her expression a mix of compassion and quiet resolve. Lena had her own ghosts, a brother lost to the streets, a life pieced together from odd jobs and the road's unforgiving rhythm. She'd taken to Sophia like an aunt, slipping her extra fries at the diner, teaching her how to check tire pressure on the pedal bike she rode to school. Now, as the mist outside thickened into drizzle, Lena crossed the floor, kneeling beside them. "What's this about Santa?" she asked Sophia, her voice soft, laced with the warmth of someone who'd learned to guard her tenderness. The girl hesitated, then unfolded her wish list from her pocket, the crayon scribbles vivid against the lined paper. A motorcycle with flames, a helmet shaped like a hawk's wing, and at the bottom, in block letters, "For Mom too, so we can ride together." Lena's breath caught, a subtle hitch that Jack noticed, her eyes tracing the lines as if reading a map to forgotten dreams. "This is beautiful," she murmured, her fingers brushing the paper. "You know, the Hawks. We believe in wishes like this. Loyalty's what makes them real." Sophia's eyes widened, the tremble in her hands easing as she absorbed the words. The room's hum wrapping around them like a protective veil, but the peace fractured when the doors swung open again, admitting a gust of damp air and Victor Langford's polished presence. He strode in like he owned the threshold, his coat shedding droplets onto the linoleum, eyes scanning the space with the disdain of a man appraising inventory. Whispers rippled through the volunteers. Langford's name carried weight here, tied to the factory expansions that had shuttered local shops, leaving families like Maria's scraping by. He was here for a photo op, no doubt, a check handed over for the drive to polish his image before jetting back to his high-rise world. Sophia shrank back, clutching her list, her breath quickening in shallow bursts. Langford's gaze landed on her drawing pinned to the wishboard, the same one from the diner, now joined by others in a patchwork of hopes. He plucked it free again, holding it aloft with a chuckle that echoed off the walls. "Still peddling fantasies? This place is a joke. Janitor's kid dreaming big while Daddy's empire builds real futures." His words hung heavy, drawing stares. The room's warmth cooling as judgment settled. A mother in the corner pulled her child closer, her face paling. The elderly storyteller paused, book forgotten in his lap. The volunteers exchanged glances, their compassion warring with fear of reprisal. He was the man who could buy the center and turn it into condos. Jack rose slowly, his frame casting a long shadow across the floor. The air thick with the scent of wet wool and unspoken rage. Rico and Tommy had followed him from the garage, drawn by some instinct, now flanking the doorway like sentinels. Their presence shifted the dynamic, leather and resolve cutting through the mist of intimidation. Langford turned, smirking at the bikers, his voice dripping condescension. "What? The road rat's here to play hero. Save your leather for the highway." But Jack saw the flicker in his eyes, the brief strain as he assessed the quiet strength arrayed against him. No tough talk, just the steady rise of controlled fury, tempered by the code that demanded protection over provocation. Sophia's hand found Jack's, small and trembling, her trust a weight he carried without question. Lena stepped forward, her voice even, laced with the compassion that defined them. "These wishes aren't jokes, Mr. Langford. They're what keeps folks going when the world's too busy counting dollars." The room held its breath, the drizzle outside pattering against the windows like hesitant applause. In that suspended moment, the misjudgment hung bare. The world saw the Hawks as outlaws, but here, in the heart of the vulnerable, their humanity peeled back layer by layer, revealing the silent justice that bound them. Langford's smirk faltered, his hand dropping the drawing as if burned, the first pale crack in his armor. "Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far these stories of courage and loyalty can travel." The mist clung to the community center's windows like a veil, blurring the world outside into a watercolor of grays and muted greens. Inside, the air had thickened with the residue of confrontation, the scent of damp earth mingling with the faint pine from the corner tree, its branches heavy with tinsel that caught the overhead lights in fragile glimmers. Sophia's hand slipped from Jack's as she edged back toward the craft table, Her crayons scattered like fallen leaves, her breath coming in soft, uneven pulls. Langford stood there, the drawing crumpled in his fist, his face a mask of calculated amusement that didn't quite hide the unease flickering in his eyes. The volunteers hovered at the edges, their movements slowed, a woman pausing mid-wrap on a gift bag, her fingers trembling slightly. The elderly storyteller closing his book with a quiet snap that echoed too loudly in the hush. Jack didn't advance, didn't raise his voice. He simply held his ground, the leather of his vest settling against his shoulders like an old friend's weight. His gaze steady on Langford's. Rico shifted to his left, arms crossed loosely, the rain still dripping from his jacket onto the scuffed floor, pooling in small, dark circles. Tommy flanked the right, his limp more pronounced in the stillness, but his posture straight, eyes locked forward with the quiet intensity of a man who'd faced worse than words. They weren't posturing. It was the subtle alignment of the Hawks, a brotherhood forged in miles of shared silence, where protection came not from noise, but from presence. The room felt it, the shift from vulnerability to resolve, the way the bikers' shadows stretched across the linoleum, absorbing the light without demanding it. Langford's chuckle faltered, turning into a cough as he glanced at the gathered faces, searching for allies and finding none. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, tossing the drawing onto the table where it landed beside Sophia's half-finished stars, the paper unfurling like a surrendered flag. He straightened his coat, the fabric whispering against itself, and turned toward the door, but not before his eyes darted to the wishboard where other children's hopes fluttered, simple pleas for toys, books, a warm coat. One caught his gaze. A boy's scrawled note for new shoes so I can run fast, pinned next to a faded photo of a family picnic. For a heartbeat, something crossed Langford's features, a flicker, gone as quickly as desert lightning, before he masked it with a scoff. "Charity's fine for photo ops, but don't expect miracles. Santa's a myth for the naive." He pushed through the doors, the hinges groaning in protest, and the drizzle swallowed his footsteps, leaving only the echo of his polished shoes on the wet pavement. The center exhaled collectively, a soft release of breath that rippled through the group. Lena moved first, kneeling to smooth Sophia's drawing, her hands steady despite the grease under her nails, her touch gentle as she realigned the crayon lines. "He's wrong, kiddo," she said quietly, her voice carrying the warmth of engine hum on a cool night. "Wishes like yours, they're the real power." Sophia nodded, her small chest rising and falling, but she didn't cry. Instead, she picked up her crayon, adding a bold streak of red to the motorcycle's frame, as if reclaiming the color Langford had tried to drain. Jack watched from the doorway, the chill seeping in from outside, brushing his skin, carrying the metallic tang of rain on chrome. He'd seen men like Langford before, on the road, in fleeting encounters at truck stops, their wealth a shield that hid the hollows beneath. But this felt personal now, the mockery landing on Sophia like a stone, skipped across still water, ripples spreading to Maria, to the center, to the fragile threads holding the town together. Rico clapped a hand on Jack's shoulder, light but firm, the gesture speaking volumes in its brevity. "We ride out tomorrow," Rico said, low enough for only them to hear. "But that doesn't mean we leave this behind." Tommy nodded, his jaw set, the scar on his knuckles whitening as he flexed his fingers. A remnant from a night in the desert, pulling a buddy from wreckage. Outside, the highway stretched empty under the overcast sky, taillights of passing semis blurring in the mist like distant memories. Jack stepped into it, the gravel shifting under his boots, and headed back toward the diner, the walk pulling at the ache in his knee from old falls. The Ironhawks followed at a distance, their boots a muffled cadence on the asphalt, the rain beading on their vests and tracing paths down their backs. They didn't discuss Langford outright, that would come later, around a fire pit or under starless skies. Instead, the silence between them carried the weight of decision, the moral suspense, building like storm clouds on the horizon. Protect the vulnerable. That was the code, etched deeper than any tattoo, born from their own margins. Jack's lost family, Rico's factory scars, Lena's shadowed youth, Tommy's battlefield echoes. By the time they reached the diner, the neon sign buzzed faintly against the gathering dusk, its glow reflecting off the puddles in fractured halos. Maria was behind the counter, pouring coffee for a lone trucker, her movements mechanical, the lines around her eyes deeper in the dim light. She looked up as they entered, the bell chiming softly, and offered a nod that held gratitude without words. "Sophia's still at the center," she said, sliding mugs across the worn wood, steam rising like unspoken thanks. Lena promised to walk her home. Jack settled onto his stool, the familiar creak grounding him, and wrapped his hands around the warmth, feeling the ceramic's heat seep into his palms. The diner smelled of fresh pie crust and lingering bacon, a counterpoint to the storm's petrichor drifting in. As the evening deepened, the hawks gathered in their booth, voices low over plates of cooling food, the rain now a steady drum on the roof. Conversation meandered, tales of roads passed, a shared cigarette passed hand to hand, the smoke curling toward the ceiling in lazy spirals. But beneath it the tension simmered, a controlled rage tempered by compassion. Jack's mind turned to his own hidden past, the daughter he'd barely seen since the papers were signed. Her 8th birthday, a ghost that haunted these quiet miles. Sophia's wish mirrored that ache, a small light in the dark, and mocking it felt like an assault on second chances. He glanced at Rico, who met his eyes with a subtle tilt of the head, the signal that the brotherhood was aligned, ready to act if the moment called. Night fell fully then, the highway's hum fading to whispers, engines cooling in the lot like sleeping beasts. Maria wiped down the counter one last time, her rag tracing circles over the spot where Langford had sat, as if erasing the stain of his presence. The hawks lingered, their loyalty a quiet anchor in the somber space, the desert wind rattling the windows like a reminder of choices yet to come. In the margins of this rain-soaked evening, the first threads of redemption began to weave, not with fanfare, but in the subtle bonds that held the outcasts together, waiting for the turn that would shift the road forever. The night deepened into a velvet hush, broken only by the intermittent swipe of windshield wipers on passing trucks and the soft hiss of rain easing into silence. Jack sat at the diner's counter long after the last customer had gone. The neon signs hummed the sole companion to his thoughts. Maria had flipped the closed placard hours ago, but she lingered too, stacking chairs with deliberate slowness, her shadow stretching across the checkered floor like a weary extension of herself. The air inside carried the fading aroma of apple pie and strong coffee, undercut by the damp earthiness seeping through the cracks in the doorframe. Rico and Tommy had stepped out to the lot, their low voices murmuring over a shared flask under the overhang, while Lena had walked Sophia home earlier, the girl's small hand tucked into hers, their footsteps fading into the mist-shrouded street. Jack's fingers traced the rim of his empty mug, the porcelain cool now, etched with faint rings from countless refills. He could feel the pull of the road in his bones, the urge to mount up and let the throttle drown out the ache. But something anchored him here, a moral tether woven from Sophia's crumpled drawing and Maria's quiet endurance. Langford's car had peeled away at dusk, tires spitting gravel in a final show of indifference. But his presence lingered like exhaust fumes, fouling the air. Jack had caught Maria glancing at the corkboard where the toy drive poster once hung, now just an empty nail protruding like a broken promise. She paused in her wiping, rag clutched tight, her breath escaping in a long, strained exhale that spoke volumes in the empty space. "You don't have to stay," she said finally. not looking at him, her voice threaded with the exhaustion of holding pieces together alone. Jack met her eyes when she turned, seeing the flicker of vulnerability there, the single mother who'd traded dreams for duty, her youth's fire banked to embers under the weight of bills and bedtime stories. The Hawks, you're good people, but that man's got pull, factories, land. He could swallow this place whole. The door rattled then, not from wind, but from Rico pushing back in, his jacket shedding droplets that pattered onto the mat. Tommy followed, his face drawn tighter in the harsh light of the overhead bulb, the limp pulling at his step as he shook off the chill. They carried the night's resolve with them, unspoken but palpable. The Brotherhood's code humming like an idling engine. Rico slid onto a stool beside Jack, his calloused hand drumming once on the counter, a subtle signal, the rhythm of decisions forged in garages and graveyards. "Heard from Lena on the walkie," Rico said, voice low, gravelly from the flask's burn. "Center's buzzing, Langford's people called, offering to sponsor the toy drive. Big check, strings attached. Wants the whole thing rebranded, his name on every box." Maria's rag stilled, her knuckles whitening around the fabric, a tremor running through her arms that she tried to hide by folding it precisely. The diner felt smaller, the walls pressing in with the scent of cooling grease and unspoken fear. Jack's chest tightened, that controlled rage stirring, not a blaze, but a steady burn, fueled by memories of his own fractures, the divorce papers that stole his daughter, the courtroom silences where justice bent to wallets. He'd ridden away from that life, chasing redemption in the miles, but here it circled back, demanding he choose, ride on, or stand for the vulnerable who'd become kin in this roadside limbo. Tommy leaned against the doorframe, his breath visible in the draft, eyes shadowed with the ghosts of patrols where protection meant life or death. "It's a buyout," he murmured, the words hanging heavy, his fingers flexing at his sides, nails bitten short from nights of restless waiting. He mocks a kid's wish, then swoops in like Santa with a ledger, but we know his type, gives with one hand, takes with the other. The rain had stopped fully now, leaving the lot slick and reflective, the bike's chrome mirroring the diner's glow in silvery distortion. Outside, the desert wind whispered through the scrub, carrying the faint, acrid bite of distant wildfires, a reminder of how quickly things could ignite. Maria sank onto a stool, her shoulders curving inward, the weight of it all etching deeper lines into her face. "Sophia?" She lit up talking about that bike today, after Lena walked her home. Said the Hawks would make Santa jealous. Her voice cracked on the last word, not loud, but enough to pierce the quiet, her hand pressing to her mouth as if to trap the sound. Jack reached across, his palm covering hers briefly, rough leather against soft skin, a gesture of compassion that needed no explanation. In that touch, the human emotion bloomed, the tremble in her fingers mirroring his own hidden grief, the pause before she pulled away, eyes glistening but dry, refusing to shatter. The tension escalated in the silence that followed, the air thick with the moral suspense of what came next. Rico's gaze met Jack's, a nod passing between them, the kind that sealed pacts without fanfare. They'd seen society misjudge them before, leather-clad threats in the eyes of small-town sheriffs, heartless wanderers to the polished elite. But here, in Maria's diner, their humanity stood bare, layered with loyalty that law couldn't touch. "We don't let it stand," Rico said simply, rising to peer out the window where the highway lay dark and endless. Headlights flickering like hesitant stars. Tommy pushed off the frame, his resolve straightening his spine, the Brotherhood's fire kindling in his steady breath. But as they gathered coats, the phone behind the counter jangled, a shrill intrusion cutting through the resolve. Maria answered, her face paling under the fluorescent glare, the receiver trembling against her ear. "Yes, Mr. Langford. The center. Wait, you're coming back." She hung up slowly, the click echoing like a chambered round, her eyes wide with the dawning conflict. He wants to meet. Tonight. Says it's about the diner's future, expansion, jobs. But his voice, it was cold, like he knows we're talking. Jack felt the surge then, internal storm, meeting external threat, his hands clenching at his sides, breath shallow in the charged air. The code demanded action, protect no matter the cost, but compassion tempered it, urging restraint, a path through the rage that preserved the fragile bonds. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the sign, the neon buzzing louder as if urging them forward. The hawks exchanged glances, the decision hanging in the balance. Engines waiting in the dark to roar if needed. In this somber interlude, the weight of unspoken guilt and loyalty pressed down, the roads promised twisting toward a confrontation that could redefine them all, one quiet choice at a time. The diner's clock ticked past midnight, its hands crawling like shadows fleeing light, the fluorescent bulbs humming a monotonous dirge overhead. Jack stood by the window, his breath fogging the glass in shallow bursts, watching the highway unfurl into blackness where Langford's headlights had vanished hours ago. The air inside clung heavy with the remnants of rain, damp leather from the hawks' jackets. The faint bitterness of cooled coffee grounds Maria had swept into the trash. She paced behind the counter now, her steps measured, each one echoing the internal churn Jack felt, mirroring his own. Rico leaned against the jukebox in the corner, arms folded, his silhouette a dark outline against the faded posters of Route 66 sunsets. Tommy hovered near the door, fingers drumming a silent rhythm on the frame, his eyes scanning the lot as if expecting shadows to materialize from the mist. The phone call had shifted everything. Langford's voice through the receiver, a velvet blade, promises of partnership laced with the threat of erasure. He'd return at dawn, he said, to discuss the diner's viability, his tone implying it was already a foregone conclusion. Maria had set the receiver down with trembling hands, her face draining to the pallor of old porcelain, the weight of it pressing her against the counter until she gripped the edge for support. "He knows," she whispered again, the words barely audible over the wind's low moan outside, rattling the loose pane like a warning. Jack turned from the window, his boots scuffing the linoleum, and met her gaze. In her eyes he saw the flicker of a woman cornered, not just by money, but by the fear of failing the one light she had left. Sophia, asleep now in the apartment above the diner, her wish list tucked under her pillow like a talisman. Rico broke the silence first, his voice a gravel rumble, pushing off the jukebox with a creak of floorboards. We wait, but not passive. He moved to the coffee pot, pouring fresh into mugs with deliberate slowness, steam rising in thin veils that caught the light and dissolved. Handing one to Maria, he paused, his calloused fingers brushing hers, a gesture of solidarity, rough but kind, the kind that spoke of garages where fixes came for engines and souls alike. She took it, her breath steadying in a long exhale, the mug's warmth seeping into her palms like a borrowed strength. Tommy nodded, stepping closer, his limp pulling taut in the tension, but his posture unyielding. "Dawn's not far. We make sure it's on our terms." The Brotherhood's code thrummed between them, unspoken, loyalty over law, protection woven into every mile they'd ridden together. Outside, the desert wind stirred the scrub, carrying the sharp scent of sage and wet sand through the cracked door. Jack felt the escalation building, a slow coil in his chest, not the hot flash of anger, but a deeper burn, controlled, like the steady throb of an engine pushed to its limits. He'd faced standoffs before, barroom stares turning to shoves, sheriffs eyeing their patches with suspicion. But this was insidious, a billionaire's game where the pieces were lives like Maria's. His mind drifted to the hidden fractures in his own past. The divorce that had stripped him of fatherhood, leaving him chasing echoes on the highway. Sophia's innocence tugged at that wound, her drawing a mirror to the birthday cards he'd sent unanswered, the guilt that rode shotgun on every horizon. Maria set her mug down, the ceramic clinking softly, and crossed to the corkboard, her fingers tracing the empty spot where the toy drive poster had been. If he buys this place, the center next, Sophia's world shrinks to these walls, no room for dreams. Her voice wavered, a subtle crack, her shoulders hunching as if bracing against an invisible gale. Jack moved beside her, the air between them charged with shared silence, his presence a quiet bulwark. He didn't touch her, but the space hummed with compassion, the way his breath synced with hers in the pause, the faint tremor in his hand as he adjusted his vest, leather whispering against fabric. The Hawks watched, Rico's eyes narrowing with that measured rage, Tommy's jaw clenching in restrained solidarity, their humanity peeling back in layers, not the violent spectres society painted, but guardians forged from their own margins. The door burst open then, admitting Lena in a rush of cold air, her hair plastered from the walkback, jacket zipped tight against the chill. She'd been at Maria's apartment, checking on Sophia, her face now etched with urgency, eyes sharp as she scanned the room. Girls out cold, dreaming of that bike. But word spreading. Trucker at the gas station said Langford's been calling shots, eyeing the whole strip for his empire. She shook off the damp, water pattering to the floor, and joined the circle, her wiry frame adding to the unspoken phalanx. The tension ratcheted higher, external now bleeding into internal, the moral conflict sharpening like a blade on whetstone. Protect the diner, the center, the wish, or ride away, preserving their freedom but abandoning the vulnerable. Jack's pulse quickened, a strained breathing he masked with a slow sip of coffee, the bitterness grounding him. Rico paced to the window, peering into the dark, where their bikes stood like silent allies, chrome dulled by night. We talked to him at dawn. Lay it out. No games. His words carried the weight of decision, balanced on the edge of compassion and resolve, his hands flexing at his sides, knuckles paling under the scars. Tommy exhaled sharply, leaning into the counter, his reflection fractured in the glass behind the shelves. And if he pushes, we don't back down. Not for her. Maria looked up, her eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. A silent gratitude passing, the room alive with the subtle emotions, the hitch in Lena's breath as she nodded, the long pause before Jack spoke. "We stand," Jack said finally, his voice low, steady as the road's endless pull. The wind howled outside, engines waiting in the cooling dark, the neon sign flickering like a heartbeat. But beneath the rising storm, the Hawks' loyalty held, a quiet justice brewing in the shadows, compassion tempering the rage that threatened to spill. Dawn loomed, carrying the promise of confrontation, the weight of choices pressing down like the desert's unyielding sky. If this story already has your heart, hit the like button. It helps the story of Jack Harlan reach more people who still believe in humanity. Dawn broke over the desert like a reluctant confession, painting the highway in strokes of pale gold and lingering shadow, the air crisp with the scent of sagebrush and evaporating dew. The diner's neon sign had long since dimmed, but its glow lingered in the puddles scattered across the lot, reflecting the first light like fractured memories. Jack stood at the threshold, his boots planted firm on the weathered steps, the leather of his vest still carrying the night's chill. The Iron Hawks flanked him, Rico to his left, hands buried in his pockets, breath visible in soft plumes. Tommy on the right, stance steady despite the faint pull in his leg. Lena behind, her eyes scanning the horizon where dust devils twisted lazily in the distance. Maria hovered inside the doorway, her apron twisted in her hands, the faint tremor in her fingers betraying the storm she'd weathered alone for too long. Sophia slept upstairs still, oblivious to the pivot point the morning held. The low rumble of an engine approached from the east, gravel crunching under tires that spoke of city polish invading rural grit. Langford's sleek black sedan pulled into the lot, its headlights cutting off abruptly, leaving only the whine of the door opening and his shoes clicking against the damp asphalt. He emerged alone, coat draped over one arm, briefcase in hand. A man armored in tailored confidence, but the lines around his eyes betrayed a night unrested, shadows pooling like unspoken doubts. He paused at the sight of the bikers, his step faltering just enough to notice the desert wind tugging at his tie like an insistent question. "Harlan," he said, voice clipped but lacking its earlier edge, nodding toward Jack as if acknowledging a rival in a boardroom skirmish. "Didn't expect an audience. This is business. The diner, the center. My offer stands. Modernization, jobs, sign, and your friends here can ride off without interference." Jack didn't move. His gaze level, the morning light catching the silver threads in his hair, turning them to threads of resolve. The air hung heavy between them, scented with cooling engines and the faint metallic tang of the sedan's exhaust. Rico shifted subtly, a low exhale escaping him, while Tommy's fingers curled at his sides, knuckles paling under the scars. Lena's breath came measured, her wiry frame taut, compassion warring with the controlled rage simmering in her chest. Maria stepped forward then, emerging fully into the light, her voice steady despite the strain etching her features. "It's not just business, Mr. Langford. It's lives, my daughter's wish. You laughed it off like trash, but it's her hope you're stepping on." Langford's smirk flickered, but it died under the weight of their collective stare, the Brotherhood's presence a silent wall that no ledger could breach. He set the briefcase down, the thud echoing softly, and rubbed his temple, a gesture small and human that cracked his facade. "Wishes," he muttered, glancing toward the diner, where the corkboard's empty nail glinted through the window. "I built an empire on realism, not fairy tales. My own father was a janitor, scrubbed floors in high rises I later owned. He died broke, dreaming of better days. I learned early, sentiment gets you nowhere." The words hung there, a revelation slipping unbidden, reframing the man before them, not just a predator, but a survivor scarred by the same margins, his cruelty a shield forged from personal ashes. Jack felt it then, the moral suspense uncoiling, his own hidden past mirroring Langford's, the veteran who'd lost his family to the road's pull, the father grieving absences that no miles could mend. The wind picked up, whispering through the scrub, carrying the distant hum of waking traffic. Langford's eyes met Jack's, and in that pause, the strained breathing between them spoke volumes, the subtle hitch in the billionaire's inhale, the long silence where judgment softened to recognition. "You think you're protectors," Langford continued, voice lowering, "but I've seen your kind. Outlaws playing saints. What makes you different?" Rico stepped forward, his gravelly tone even, laced with the compassion of shared roads. "We don't play. We've lost enough to know loyalty's the only law that lasts. Your father's dream died, but it doesn't have to end yours, or hers." He nodded toward the apartment above, where Sophia stirred in her sleep, unaware of the pivot below. Tension crested as Langford reached for the briefcase. But instead of opening it, he paused, his hand trembling faintly, a small, intimate reaction that peeled back another layer. The Hawks held their ground, not advancing, but their unity a quiet force, the code activating in the desert's stark light. "No one hurts those we protect." Maria's breath caught, her hand pressing to her chest, eyes glistening with the weight of potential loss averted. Langford exhaled slowly, the sound ragged and straightened, his face paling as if the morning's truth had drained him. "Fine," he said, the word heavy, defeated. "The offer's off the table. The diner stays. The center, too. No strings." He turned back to the car, but hesitated, pulling a check from his pocket, unsigned, blank, and slid it across the sedan's hood toward Maria. "For the toy drive. Real Santa stuff. Make sure that bike gets built." He drove away without another word, the sedan kicking up dust that swirled like released ghosts, leaving the lot in a hush, broken only by the wind's sigh. The group stood in the aftermath, the sun climbing higher, warming the air with tentative promise. Maria clutched the check, her shoulders easing for the first time, a soft laugh escaping, trembling, relieved, as she glanced at the bikes gleaming in the light. Jack felt the turn then, the emotional shift from conflict to quiet justice, his hand resting briefly on her arm, the gesture conveying forgiveness, not just for Langford, but for the world's misjudgments. Rico clapped Tommy on the back, a subtle nod passing while Lena's eyes softened, the brotherhood's compassion blooming in the shared silence. As the morning unfolded, the diner filled with the scent of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon, volunteers from the center drifting in with thanks on their lips, the community weaving tighter around the fragile victory. Sophia bounded down the stairs later, her eyes wide at the news, hugging Maria with a joy that lit the room like dawn's full blaze. The Hawks lingered through breakfast, voices low over plates reflecting on survival's quiet victories, loyalty that bridged outcasts, second chances hidden in highway dust, redemption found not in grand gestures, but in the stand taken at first light. Jack watched Sophia sketch another drawing, her crayon flying, and felt the weight lift, his own grief softening in the glow of her unscarred hope. In the end, the road called them onward, engines warming under the relentless sun, but the bonds forged here lingered, a testament to hearts that beat beneath leather and loss. Subscribe for more stories of compassion, justice, and redemption. Thank you for watching the case of Billionaire mocked the janitor's daughter's wish. Santa's reaction made him turn pale. See you in the next one.